Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and on this segment of Action Awareness, I'm going to be talking about Infiltrate, an action of the ninjas. They have 2 copies of this card. In a game with as much card text as Smash Up, it's inevitable that it will take some time for precise wording to mature, since it's difficult to predict how the game will grow. As a result, there are going to be occasions where a card simply doesn't do what it implies, and sadly, Infiltrate is one of those cards. You'll notice that the image I'm showing is missing the words play on a base. Those words were added later, and that kind of proves the point. The current card text states, play on a base. Destroy an action that has been played here. Ongoing, you may ignore this base's ability until the start of your next turn. This implies that every turn, you may, at some point, start ignoring the base's ability until the start of your next turn. However, this is incorrect. In addition, Infiltrate could also be forced to destroy itself, depending on the verb tense you use for has been played here. Here's what it should have read instead. Play on a base. Destroy another action on this base. Ongoing. You may ignore this base's ability. Destroy this card at the start of your next turn. I'll keep this fixed so that you could reference it throughout the video. There are 2 aspects to unpack here, both the duration of the card as well as the actual effect. The rewording of the card will help indicate the duration. I could be mistaken, but as of that 70s expansion, there are no cards or bases that prevent an action from destroying itself. The few cards that prevent action destruction, such as Steam Queen, only block effects from other players, not explicit destruction like General Ivan does for minions. So Infiltrate will destroy a base action, which is generally useful, and its other ability will persist until the start of the next turn. But is the ability always ignored, or is it ignored on demand? And what does it actually mean for only you to ignore an ability? Well, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. The card reads that you may ignore this base's ability until the start of your next turn. This is a particularly imprecise phrasing, as you and ignore can be very subjective. To illustrate this point, I'd like to bring up 2 considerations that I often use in interpreting card text in several games. The first is a legal principle that the inclusion or expression of one is the exclusion of all others. Yes, my lawyer friends, I know that argument doesn't always work, but bear with me. The second is an unwritten rule that I have where cards in the same set released at the same time have precedence on one another. In other words, if one card in a set has specific wording, it means that those words were under consideration at that time, and if the other does not have them, then the intent must be different in some way. And so I submit Exhibit A into evidence, Jammed Signal. This card clearly states that the base's ability is to be ignored at all times when the card is in play, by all players. Therefore, Infiltrate might mean that the base's ability is ignored until the start of your next turn, but that's not what the card says. Infiltrate says you may ignore, and that's where the rules get pretty murky. What does it mean for a single player to ignore a base's ability? If you don't think this is confusing, I'd like to submit Exhibit B into evidence, the Smash Up app. Many times I have played against ninjas when Rhodes Plaza Mall was in play. I throw as many minions as I can at the base, but the ninja player, on hard AI, plays Infiltrate on the base, hoping to deactivate its ability. However, he ignores it, not me, so I get VPs for all my minions, while the AI gets nothing. Despite discovering this in beta testing, I still have not seen it fixed, and something got lost in translation, which means that the wording is definitely confusing. What does it mean for a player to ignore a base's ability when 2 players are involved? Let's look at tar pits. When a minion is destroyed here, it is to be placed on the bottom of the owner's deck. If I have Infiltrate on the base when my minion gets destroyed, do I ignore the ability and place it in my discard pile? Or do I ignore it when I destroy someone else's minion? By only specifying you, it's not entirely clear because both players are seemingly involved in the transaction. I would assume it would be the latter, as I am the one causing the base's ability to be triggered, but honestly, I don't believe it is entirely clear. Mushroom Kingdom is another interesting example. Since the start of your turn is anything before Phase 2, You can prevent yourself from moving another player's minions there, which is essentially the same as not choosing the optional ability anyway. But would Infiltrate prevent another player from moving your minions there? If the answer is no, which I believe it is, it brings up another interesting question. What value does that actually provide? The base would need an ability that would have to be bad for you, such as Temple of Goju, which places the highest powered minion on the bottom of your deck. But unless you are playing zombies, this is likely to be good for you, since you get a second chance to play that minion rather than having it go to the discard pile. I could understand wanting to ignore the Evans City Cemetery ability, since you would discard your hand. For tar pits, maybe you'd rather a minion be in the discard pile instead of the bottom of the deck for the same reason I mentioned earlier. But overall, this doesn't seem to be particularly useful without clarification. Imagine the argument you would have over Cave of Shinies, where a victory point is at stake. You definitely don't want to disable Rhodes Plaza Mall just for yourself. I even saw this in a tournament, and it makes for a really awkward conversation, and I just went with it because the base never scored anyway. Crisis averted. Is this just a case of forward thinking with bases like Haunted House or Czar's Palace? Or is it an unfortunate casualty of the English language? I'm honestly torn on the issue, so I'd love to hear your feedback. My best advice is to focus on the action destruction part and not rely on disabling a base's ability. You'll cause less arguments that way. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.